Chapter 16 AP Notes. Continue where we left off with Part 2, Bailey's Contention. We've read the quote already, and we've said why Southerners would be forced to like the individuals. And that would be because they live with them. They're raising their kids. How can you hate somebody when you know them and they're good people? I don't care what kind of racial racism you have. When you live with somebody day to day, you can't help it. But to justify slavery, they must despise their race. Northerners, on the other hand, don't live next door to African Americans daily and don't want to. So Northerners profess to like the race standing against slavery, but don't want them living next door to them. So I find that this contention really leads us to the next level after the Civil War and Reconstruction, and we'll get there later on. So now, the abolitionist movement. Let's go from early attempts all the way to the slow continued group of the abolitionist movement. And let's be quite clear here. The abolitionist movement was a minority movement all the way up until the Civil War. So let's look at the early attempts to deal with the slavery issue. And of course, the first ones to do it were the Quakers. The Quakers would be part of the Underground Railroad. Here are some of those escape routes, of course, headed towards the north and even to Canada, or early on into Spanish Florida, or down the Mississippi River, get to the ocean, and then you can, again, catch a ship up north. Wherever you could go to get away from the South, frankly. Whoops, excuse me, let me go back to my early attempts. Partially because of them, slavery was banned in the North by 1800. The Quakers were very literal believers in the Bible. It said all men are God's children. Thus, how could you have slavery if we're all God's children? So you would always know somebody on the railroad was a Quaker when they met you by saying, "Hello, friend," since their real name was the Society of Friends. Just because slavery was made illegal did not ensure equal treatment. Be sure to know that. Okay. In 1808, the slave trade is outlawed. Now, we've talked about this already in Part 1. Done the first year it's permitted under the Constitution. Telling us something, that they really think slavery's on its way out. Then comes the Missouri Compromise. Here you go. This is, you've had this discussion. You're having sectionalism arise. But here it is. Plain and simple, legislated, put into American law, Missouri Compromise, drawing the line of 3630. Frankly, may have been an attempt to delay the day of reckoning, but it does implicitly grant Congress the right to control the extension of slavery into the territories. So with the Northwest Ordinance, we had the precedent set, but now it's a done deal. Congress has this power. Liberia was established in 1822 by the American Colonization Society. This is in Africa. And there's a certificate you could have. And what it was, hey, let's help the slaves. Oh, man, it was such a bad thing. We ripped them out of Africa. Let's send them back. And then you had the bad side. Yeah, let's send those troublemakers back. So there was 2 points to this Liberation Society, American Liberation Society. First, the good side, trying to right a wrong. I mean, it was headed up by President Monroe. Legitimate funding, land, and support. You're going to send you there with some seed, some land, a plow, and get you started. These people are trying to right the wrongs of slavery. Again, they're only sending freedmen, though. On the other hand, who is the biggest financer of the American Colonization Society? A slave owner. That's because they're trying to get rid of the strongest leaders to lead a rebellion. Freedmen. Come on. And most African Americans didn't want to go. They were born here in America. They considered America their home. They were Americans. So in the end, only 1,100 freedmen would be located.
During our lifetime, we travel many roads.
President of the society was Robert Finley. So know him. He's the one you got to associate with the American Colonization Society. Now, there was other societies. As a matter of fact, the first anti-slave society, official one in America, was started by Ben Franklin. Liberia, with the capital named Monrovia, named for President Monroe. How could the South possibly justify racism? Well, here are their excuses. Oh, it's necessary for America and the South to survive. It benefits the North too. Labor force was superior. Fortunes of the slaves were tied with the owner. The Bible says slavery's okay. They, poor slaves, couldn't survive without their owners. I wonder how they did it for 100,000 years before. And it was just inevitable. So they had plenty of excuses for racism to justify slavery. Now, anti-slavery societies, they number few, and here is a link to take you to manumission societies. What is manumission? When you take your slaves and set them free. There was 103 in the South, 40 in the North. So you're going to see before a certain period here, before the 1830s, the South was really leading in abolition. This is going to end quite soon. What were the reasons for the development of the abolitionist movement? First, the Second Great Awakening. With the Second Great Awakening, part of general reform movement of the 30s and 40s, to get evil from society, growing recognition that slavery constituted the greatest of all evils. And in 1833, Britain got rid of their slavery. Growing belief that the U.S. leader in democratic political thought would be the only civilized nation permitting slavery. I mean, come on. The growing feeling of hypocrisy. I mean, let's think about it. All men are created equal, except for slaves. The failure to die is expected natural death. Remember, the 1808 written into the Constitution were to make slave trade illegal. Quote from Frederick Douglass: "Slavery brands your republicanism a sham, your humanity as a base pretense, your Christianity a lie." You know, you're starting off the colonies with the Pilgrims and for religious freedom, and here you got slavery. Come on. Highly publicized abuses would lead to abolitionism and the Jacksonian Reform movement, which came out of the Second Great Awakening. So let's take a look at the divisions of the abolitionist movement. First, the North divided 50-50 between abolitionists and non-abolitionists. Pro-slavery, 15% among the non-abolitionists. Indifferent, 17%. Neutral, 20%. Among abolitionists, free soilers were 35% of them. One who just didn't want to spread slavery. Moderate abolitionists who don't want total equality, they just want to end slavery, 12%. And radical abolitionists who are looking for the American dream, all men are created equal, equal rights, that's only 3% amongst the abolitionists, so that's 1.5% of Americans. Not exactly a large representative American population. So abolitionists start really small. Now, who are the free soilers? They believe slavery should be left alone where it existed, frankly, because of the Constitution. They wanted to prohibit the extension of slavery into all these new territories. Now, why? One, genuine opposition to the institution of slavery. Two, believe Congress had a constitutional right to regulate slavery there. We had the precedents in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. We had the precedents of the Missouri Compromise. If it doesn't expand, it will die. So we can just wait it out to die. Also, I hate to say it, prejudice. They didn't want blacks in their neighborhoods. Hey, Keep it down there in the South. And feared increased competition for new lands. If you have all these slaves all of a sudden become free, they'll have competition for land. Prices will go up. Yeah, you see it. All right. Then you have the radical abolitionists. Best characterized by William Lloyd Garrison, publisher of The Liberator, the leading newspaper in abolitionism early on. Quote, well, what does he call for? His first issue, total freedom now. Total equal rights. He's not playing around. There's The Liberator. William Lloyd Garrison, The Liberator. Now, this guy's hardcore. Listen to his quote. In this first issue, quote, I will be as harsh as the truth and as uncompromising as justice. On this subject, I do not wish to think or speak or write with moderation. I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat one single inch. I will be heard. Characterizing the Constitution as, quote, a covenant with death and an agreement with hell because it legalized slavery. He believed in immediate, uncompensated emancipation. What do I mean by uncompensated? You had some people say, hey, let's end slavery. We'll pay the Southerners for all their slaves, and thus they'll be free. Now, privately, he would accept emancipation promptly commenced and gradually accomplished. He did want it to happen, but in public, it was do it now. Now, Garrison is important far beyond the numbers his movement attracts. And why? Excuse me. And it's frankly because he's scaring the bejesus out of the South. He is boisterous and loud and will be heard. The South mistakenly believes he is the spokesman for the whole abolitionist movement. Or he's not. So where they see the whole North as radically abolitionist, I've already shown you where about 1.5% is. So Garrison becomes very important in leading towards tensions rising in the abolitionist movement in the South. You'll get abolitionists like the Grimke sisters, who argue for first abolitionist rights and then women's rights. Became famous lecturing women and men about abolitionism. I love going to this text and see if you can answer these two questions. Looking at the reading, I would pause your film at this point and try to answer. Number 1 and number 2. Very excellent examples of the thought of the time period. Frederick Douglass was the number 1 leader of the abolitionist movement once he arrived on the scene. He was an escaped slave who taught himself to read as a slave. Once he does escape, he publishes out of Rochester, New York, a newspaper called The North Star, encouraging slaves to escape. Extremely effective orator, was very intelligent and very well spoken. So who are the moderate abolitionists? I guess the leader of them would be Theodore Weld, favored gradual, compensated emancipation, and published a pamphlet called Slavery as It Is, and was one of the few to actually travel to the South. His appeal was much greater since he was more moderate. His quote appealed to him was, attributed to him, quote, slavery is the blight of this nation, the curse of the North and the curse of the South. It confounds your politics. It has silenced your ablest men. It has muzzled the pulpit and stifled the press. It has robbed 3 million men of what is dearer than life. It has kept back the welfare of 17 million more.